Wagwan, my GCSE science students. In today's video, we're going to be doing a revision on chapter 4, which is organizing animals and plants. And this is if you are doing the AQA exam board for science, okay? You can watch this video if you're doing foundation, higher, or triple, okay? This covers everything. Now, this chapter is quite intense, so let's not waste a minute, okay? So the first thing we're going to be looking at, the blood. We're going to also be looking at the blood vessels. We're going to be looking at the heart, helping the heart, breathing and gas exchange, tissues and organs in plants, transport system in plants, evaporation and transpiration. And finally, we're going to be looking at factors affecting transpiration, okay? So lots to do. Let's get this started, okay? Good. So the first thing that you need to know is that the blood is made up of several components, okay? Firstly, it is made up of plasma, which is that yellow liquid that you can see in my diagram here. All right, good. The blood is also responsible, well, rather, the blood is also made up of blood cells. So you have your red blood cells, you also have your white blood cells, okay? Now, the blood has several functions, okay? It carries carbon dioxide to the lungs, it carries urea to the kidneys, it carries around the products of digestion, all right, to your small intestine, all right? Its main responsibility is for movement of substances, okay? So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is the red blood cells. Now you can see the diagram here, and the function of the red blood cell is to transport oxygen and also carbon dioxide around the body. Too easy. Okay, now it has some special adaptations, and what does that mean is how is it fixed for its function? All right, so the first thing is that it has that biconcave shape. So if you have a look at the shape here, it has that biconcave shape, and the reason for that is almost like a donut, and the reason for that is so that it can carry as much oxygen as possible. Another one of its adaptation is that it contains a red substance which is called hemoglobin, and that's responsible for binding to the oxygen, okay? Good. They also have no nucleus, and the reason they have no nucleus is so that they can make as much space for carrying the oxygen, for the hemoglobin to carry that oxygen, okay? So this is a very important adaptation. So normally what the question will say is, how is the red blood cell suitable for its function? And these are the answers that you will reel off to your exam board, all right? Too easy. Let's go. So next up now, we're looking at your white blood cells, okay? Now you have your different types of white blood cells, but the main function of the white blood cell is to protect the body, okay? All right, and what are the adaptations? Some of them, they can produce antitoxins, okay, which neutralize the poison. So you have your antitoxin right here, which neutralizes the poison. Then some of them will produce antibodies, okay, which destroys the pathogen. All right, that's going to be discussed in chapter 5, I think it is. All right, and then you also have some which can engulf harmful microorganisms in a process known as phagocytosis, okay? A process known as phagocytosis. But as I said to you before, this is going to be discussed in a chapter later. That chapter is going to be chapter 6, rather. I said chapter 5, chapter 6, okay? Good. Now also, as it relates to blood, the blood is also responsible for clotting, okay? And there's a series of reactions which converts this protein fibrinogen into platelets, all right? And fibrinogen in the platelets into fibrin, which is insoluble. So you can see that here, okay? So this process is called clotting, okay? So if you have a look here, what will then happen? It produces a network of protein fibers which captures a lot of the red blood cell. Okay, and after it captures it, it stops it from bleeding by forming some sort of jelly. All right, and this clot will then dry, it will then harden and forms a clot. Okay, and that is that insoluble bit there. So this is insoluble, the fibrin is insoluble, and that clot, it will stop bacteria from entering into the body. Okay, now we're now going to be looking at the blood vessels. Now, there are 3 sets of blood vessels that you need to know about, okay? You have your arteries, you have your veins and you have your capillaries. Now, the first one that we're going to be looking at is the artery, okay? And as it says here, the artery is responsible for carrying blood from the heart to the organs in the body. So it carries blood away from the heart, okay? Away from heart. So I use the A in a way to link that to arteries, to remember that it carries blood away from the heart, okay? Also, the blood that's flowing inside the capillary, that pressure is very, very high because it's coming from the heart, okay? So it's carrying high pressure blood. So each time your heart beats, it increases the pressure from the arteries, okay? Good. Now, because of that, if you notice here, it has thick and elastic and muscular walls, okay? And the reason for that is so that it can withstand the high pressure, okay? So that it can withstand high pressure. Too easy, okay? Good. So it can withstand high pressure, all right? It also has a small lumen to maintain that pressure, because remember, it's carrying that blood all around the body, okay? So to maintain that pressure. Good. So for the arteries, these are the key points that you need to know. Add that to your flashcard straight away, okay? Good. Now the veins, good. If you have a look here, it moves blood away from the organs, okay? Away from the organs back into the heart, okay? So what we can say, vein in, goes into heart. You have to have these little things to help you when you're revising, okay? Good. So, and the pressure of the blood is going to be low, all right? So most of the times, veins will contain something called valves. So you can see the valves here. And what the valve does is that it prevents the blood from flowing backward. So it stops the blood from flowing backward. It allows the blood to only flow in one direction. All right. And the muscles will also help that to happen. Also, your blood inside your vein would also be low pressure. All right. And because it's low pressure, that's also why it has the valve. And then the walls are thin because it's low pressure blood, so it doesn't need to withstand no low pressure blood. There's also no pulse. Like in the artery, you'd have a pulse, but in veins, there's no pulse. And then you now have your capillaries. All right. Now your capillaries, what they do, they join arteries and veins through organs. Okay. So they're like the link. So these would be your capillaries right there, okay? That's your capillary bed. And they carry blood at a reduced pressure. Now, there are lots of tiny vessels which goes through the organs, and what it does is that they have a large surface area which allows gases to move out and in. So you'd have oxygen moving out to the organs, and then you have carbon dioxide moving back in as a result of respiration, okay? They have large surface area to allow for the diffusion of these substances. Not only gases, but you would also have your glucose be moving out and your waste products moving into the arteries, okay? Good. Now, so to summarize, you need to know about your arteries, your veins, your capillaries. Make sure you can identify the structure. Please note that the walls of the capillary are only one cell thick, so that it allows for rapid diffusion, okay? Good. Now, inside our body, we have what is called a double circulatory system, all right? And a double circulatory system simply means that in one circuit, the blood passes through the heart twice, okay? So in one circuit, the blood passes through the heart twice. Now, what's the advantage of this? It means, therefore, that the pressure of the blood, which is coming from the lungs, can then be increased again to send throughout the body, okay? So when it goes to the lungs and you have your carbon dioxide going out, your oxygen coming back in, so it becomes oxygenated, it's going to go back to the lungs, and then that pressure is maintained and pushed around, okay? Good. It also means that it keeps it very efficient and is able to send oxygenated blood all around the body, okay? So what I want you to realize as it relates to double circulatory system is that the blood goes from the body, okay? So let's track that. From the body, it then goes to the lungs, sorry, it goes to the heart, then from the heart to the lungs, then from the lungs back to the heart, okay? Then from the heart, it then goes to the body, and then from the body, it goes right back around, okay? It goes right back here. Is that clear? Good. Excellent. All right. Now you have two circulation here. You have your pulmonary circulation and your systemic circulation. The pulmonary circulation is from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart again. And then your systemic is from the heart to the body, from the body back to the heart. That's your systemic circulation, and that's what makes up the double circulatory system. So double circulatory system means that the blood passes through the heart twice in every circuit. Okay, good. Now you also need to be able to identify the different parts of the heart. Okay, key thing that you need to note is that, notice, even though this is on your left side, it is referred to as your right. Okay, good, because you're looking at, it's called lateral inversion, but you're looking at the heart in that direction. Okay, good. So that's the first thing that you need to be able to identify when you're labeling the heart. Okay, now your top chambers is called the atria, plural, atrium, singular. So the top chambers, you have your left and your right atria. All right, so you have your right atrium, which gets the blood from the vena cava. So the blood comes in here. It goes through your tricuspid valve. Now this valve prevents the backflow of blood. Okay, it then goes to your right ventricle. From your right ventricle, it then goes to your pulmonary artery, the only vessel which contains deoxygenated blood. Okay, so let's just make a note here. This is deoxygenated blood from the body. Okay, and it's being carried by the vena cava, which is the main vein. Okay, so it goes into the right atrium, past the tricuspid valve, right atrium, past the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it goes to your pulmonary artery, which then goes to the lungs. Okay, and then from the lungs, it goes to your pulmonary vein, the only vein which carries oxygenated blood. It then goes to your left atrium. Okay, good. From your left atrium, it then passes this valve right here, which is called your bicuspid valve. All right, and then from here, it goes to your left ventricle, and then that's sent out through the aorta to the body. Okay, so to the body. And this would be high pressure blood. All right, please note as well that your left ventricle is thicker than your right ventricle. Look at the walls of the left ventricle. It is thicker than the walls of the right ventricle. Now, why is that so? This is because the left ventricle is responsible for pumping blood. So this is pumping blood to the body, so it has a harder job. Whereas the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, which is quite close. Okay, so it pumps blood to the lungs, which is quite close. So this is pumping blood to lungs, which is close, very, very close. Okay, good. So the left ventricle is doing a harder job than the right ventricle. Okay, good. You also need to know about a group of cells which are found in the right atrium, which are called the pacemaker, and this controls how fast the heart beats. Okay, so that group of cells, they're called the pacemaker, and it is found in the right atrium. All right, so it's found there. Okay, good. Now let's move on. All right, so here is a diagram which is now just showing how everything works, everything that we were discussing here. So feel free to pause and then you can make notes as to what's happening here. All right, good. So we've discussed that. Let's move on. All right, now we're going to be tracking the blood as it moves through the body. So the first thing is that you move from the vena cava, and then from the vena cava you then go to your right atrium. So from the vena cava here, so this would be your vena cava, Good. Then to your right atrium, okay, and this is deoxygenated blood as well, okay. From the right atrium, you're then going to go to your right ventricle. Then from the right ventricle, it then goes to your pulmonary artery, which is right here. Then that goes to the lungs, where it then becomes oxygenated. So if you notice that the color here changes, the color of your blood doesn't change. Please note the color of the blood doesn't change. This is just to help you to visualize what's going on. So the carbon dioxide is going out. Then you have your oxygen, which is coming in. Then from your lungs, it then goes to your pulmonary vein. Okay, and then from the pulmonary vein, it then goes to your left atrium. So this would be your pulmonary vein. Then it goes to your left atrium. Then from your left atrium to your left ventricle, and then it goes to your aorta back to the body, and the process repeats itself. Okay, so then that would go to the body. Okay, where respiration is going to take place. And when respiration takes place, it is changing the blood from being oxygenated to deoxygenated, and then that goes back to the vena cava. Too easy. All right, good. Now, there are some issues that can happen with the heart. One such issue would be coronary heart disease, in which if you eat a lot of fatty food, or there's a buildup of fat, which can therefore prevent the cardiac tissue from getting enough oxygen, resulting in a heart attack. Okay, good. There's another problem which is called arrhythmia, which in which that your heart, the rhythm is not nice rhythm. Do 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 do. Okay, that you also have leaky valves. Remember we spoke about the valves before, so there could be a backflow of blood there. All right, you also have heart failure. Now, how do we treat these different things? So, firstly, coronary heart disease, which we mentioned that it's a buildup of fat in the arteries, which means less oxygen get to the heart muscle. Okay. Now your options are as follows. Firstly, you could use statin, okay, which is just like tablets that you take, which would then lower the cholesterol levels in the blood. All right, come also use with a low fat diet. You could also do a coronary bypass, so you could add an extra capacity for delivering oxygen. Okay, so you could do a coronary bypass here, or finally you could use a stent. A stent is almost like a balloon. This is a stent here, or a mesh, which when it's inflated, it opens it up, making more space for oxygenated blood to get to the cardiac tissue. Okay, arrhythmia, in which that the heart is not beating properly. All right, the pacemaker cells, they don't work properly, and remember the pacemaker is responsible for that proper rhythm, right? You could then be fitted with an electronic pacemaker that artificially regulates the heartbeat. So you can see a picture there. Okay, good. Now leaky valves, all right, what happens here is that they can start leaking and are not opening properly. So leaking means that it goes backwards. So remember that we spoke about the valve. So that could be something like my valve there. Excuse my poor drawing. Okay, so that's the valve there. So let's say that the blood should be going that way. Okay, so it's leaking. Blood is flowing in the opposite direction. Good. Now, how is this treated? This is treated by using a mechanical valve. Okay, they last a very long time, but one of the issues with that is that they can cause the blood clots and make that could then result in a stroke. Okay, and what happens is that the patient is given blood thinners. All right, you can also be given biological valve, believe it or not. So you take the valve from cows or pigs or humans, okay, and they are given to the person with that leaky valve. It doesn't last as long as the mechanical valve, but lots of people don't want this because of religious objections. Okay, so some religion, they don't deal with pigs or cows, so they would not want those to be fitted. All right. Now, heart failure, in which the heart just stops completely, or needs to be replaced. What can be done is that you can do what is called a transplant, okay, or you could be given an artificial heart, which is a short-term fix. Okay, good. The thing about transplant, though, you need to find someone who matches, and that's very, very, very difficult. Okay, and they'll be that person will constantly be given immunosuppressant so that the body doesn't reject the heart. All right. Good. Next up now, we're going to be looking at the breathing system. So there's some important terms that you need to know. So breathing should not be confused with respiration. Breathing is the movement of air in and out of the lungs, whereas respiration is a chemical process in which you get energy from food. So respiration is this process here where you have your glucose C6H12O6. It reacts with oxygen and it forms carbon dioxide and water, and it will produce energy. Okay, good. Let's balance that equation. All right. This process is respiration. Breathing is just inhaling and exhaling. Okay, good. Diffusion is also a term that you need to remember, which is the movement of particles from high to low concentration. All right. Now, you need to be able to label this system or know the different parts of your breathing system. So you have your nasal cavity there. All right. Then what happens? The air comes down, it passes the pharynx. The pharynx doesn't take part, but it passes the pharynx, it passes the larynx, and then now it goes down into your trachea, all right, which has that ring of muscle there. Then from the trachea, you can see the lungs on opposite side here. So from the trachea, okay, it goes down into these two branches there, the bronchi, okay. So the bronchi, two, okay, good. And then it branches off into your smaller parts, which are called the bronchioles. And then from the bronchioles, it then goes to your alveoli. You then also have this muscle here, which is called a diaphragm. Very important in breathing, okay? So remember, bronchi is plural, okay? And bronchus is singular. So you have two bronchi, okay? Good. So make sure that you know the different parts here. Now you need to know what's happening here. So your trachea, cartilage, lots of cartilage, and it carries the air to the bronchi. You then have your lungs, which is spongy, that inflames. All right. You have your bronchi. All right. One carries air to each lungs, so it branches off. Your bronchioles, those are your smaller branches from your bronchi. Then you have your alveoli. Okay. So if you're tracking the air moves down like that, and then your diaphragm, it moves up and down to help the lungs to inflate or deflate. Okay, now as it relates to the alveoli, you need to know what's happening here. So you'll be coming from your bronchiole. Okay, you'll be coming from your bronchiole, and then the air goes into your alveoli here, and you can see this is your blood vessel. Okay, that would be your blood vessel here. Now what happens is that you're going to have diffusion. So you're going to have your oxygen going to your red blood cell in that direction, and then your red blood cell will be leaving off carbon dioxide, and then that will be going back to your lungs. Okay. Now, what makes the alveoli suitable for its job? Firstly, you have tons of them. You have millions of alveoli. So they have lots of alveoli, which gives them a large surface area, which therefore means that you can absorb lots and lots of oxygen. Good. The alveoli, they also have very thin walls, so the diffusion can happen quite quickly. And also, because you have lots of capillaries, it has a good blood supply, so it maintains that concentration gradient. Okay, so that constant gradient is maintained, which allows for rapid diffusion. All right, now you need to know about breathing. How is it that we breathe? The changes which happen, and the breathing is happening because of these muscles here. You have your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles. Those are the main bits that causes breathing. Now, oh, and the intercostal muscles are these muscles between your rib cage, your rib. Okay, good. So firstly, now we're going to be looking at inhalation. So how do you inhale? Now, when you inhale, it has to do with contraction of the muscles. Okay, so the intercostal muscle and the diaphragm, they both contract. Okay, now when contraction happens, your rib cage, it moves up and out. So your rib cage moves up and out. Rib moves up and out. Okay, and when it moves up and out, your diaphragm moves down, okay, contracts and move down. Now what that does is that the volume inside your lungs gets bigger, okay? And what happens when volume gets bigger in terms of pressure? The pressure decreases, and because there's a decrease in pressure in relation to outside, which would have a higher pressure, air comes rushing in. As it relates to exhaling, this would be the opposite. So your intercostal muscles and your diaphragm is going to relax. So your rib cage is going to move down and in. So your rib cage moves down and in. Okay, and when it moves down and in, your diaphragm relax, and when it relaxes, it moves up, which means that your volume is going to get smaller, the air pressure increases, and air is pushed out. Okay, very important that you know what's happening there. All right, now we spoke about this already. All right, but just go back here. So the reason when you inhale, that concentration of oxygen gets very high. Okay, good. So you have lots of oxygen molecule in relation to the blood vessel here. Oxygen moves there. CO2 moves in that direction. Good. And that's happening by diffusion. All right. Now, we also need to know for this chapter, chapter 4, all right, it's quite a long chapter, but this is just all the important bits that you need to know. We also need to look at the plants as well. So, the transporting plants. So plants, you have your flower part there, which is responsible for reproduction. You have your leaf, which is responsible for photosynthesis. And you have your stem, which is responsible for support and also transporting substances. The root is where you would take up your mineral ions, and it also anchors the plant. Okay. Now leaves, why are they suitable for its job? Well, the function, as we mentioned, is photosynthesis. What makes it suitable? It has a large surface area, okay, which means that it can absorb as much light as possible. It's also thin, so if you look at the leaf, it's quite thin, so it doesn't have a long distance for the carbon dioxide to diffuse into the leaf, okay. And also, it has lots of cells which are packed with chloroplast, which is responsible for the trapping of light. So it contains chlorophyll. So the chloroplast contains chlorophyll, which traps as much light as possible. All right. And also, there are tiny holes on that leaf, which allows carbon dioxide to move in. Now, if you take a leaf and you cut that leaf like that and place it under the microscope, you need to know the different parts of that structure. So this is a leaf structure looked at under the microscope. So at the top, you have your epidermis, okay, which produces that waxy cuticle. So that would be your waxy cuticle here at the top. And what the waxy cuticle does is that it prevents water loss by a process called transpiration. We're going to look at that in a little bit. So it prevents transpiration or reduce transpiration. Okay, and it also protects it from pathogen. Below that, you have these elongated cells, which are called the palisade cells, which makes up the palisade mesophyll. Mesophyll is just the word for tissue in plants. Okay, so it's just a type of tissue. Okay, and it contains lots of chloroplast. You can see the chloroplast packed in there, which is used for photosynthesis. Below that, you have your spongy mesophyll, your spongy tissue. You notice lots of air gaps, which allows gases to be diffusing throughout, okay, the movement of gases. Then at the bottom here, you have your guard cells, okay, and these guard cells, they can change shape. We're going to look at that in a little bit. Due to osmosis, it allows for the opening and closing of the stomata, okay. So your stomata is that air hole here, right, which allows gases to move in and out. Now, which gases will be moving out? Which gas will be moving in? Carbon dioxide is going to be moving in. Oxygen is going to be diffusing out. Make sure you know the structures of the leaf here. All right. Now, we've looked at the xylem and the phloem. If you watched my chapter 1 video, okay. If you haven't, please go back and have a look. So these are specialized plant cells. Okay, good. So, sorry. The xylem is responsible for the movement of water from the roots to the leaf. Okay, whereas the phloem, it moves glucose, it moves the food, okay, throughout the plant, and that process is called translocation. Okay, good. And transpiration is the movement of water from the roots to the leaf. The xylem, they're dead cells, whereas the phloem, they're cells which are alive. Okay, they're made of, they have companion cells which keeps them alive. Okay, now the xylem, it's a hollow tube and it's made up of lignin spirals. Okay, whereas with the phloem, it contains something called sieve tube plates. Okay, which connect the cells together. All right, good. So these are the differences between the xylem and the phloem. Okay, it has to do with the movement. Okay, now the transpiration stream is how water is moved throughout the plant. So it's the constant movement of water through the plants, right? It's moving from the root to the leaf, and this happens in the xylem. Okay, now how does this happen? Firstly, water is going to be evaporating from the leaf via the stomata in a process called transpiration. That then pulls the water up. That water is then pulled up by capillary action. And when that happens, water then moves into the root hair cells via osmosis. And that stream just continues. Okay, good. So as the water is lost here, it's then pulled here, which then pulls the water here. So it's that constant pull of water. Okay, good. Now, what are some adaptations inside the plant? So you have your root hair cells. Okay, they have a large surface area, which ensures that you collect as much water as possible via osmosis. You also have your xylem vessels, all right, which is dead, it's hollow, and it maintains that transpiration stream. You also have your leaves, which controls the evaporation, and it controls that by the opening or closing of the stomata. When it's open, water is going to move out. When it's closed, less water is going to move out. Okay, good. And that is controlled by the guard cells. All right, now when you think about the leaf, all right, you can see the veins here in the leaf. Okay, that is really the xylem and the phloem vessel. Okay, so it is the xylem and phloem together which makes up something called the vascular bundle. Okay, and the big ones, you see them as veins. So the vascular bundle is made up of the xylem and the phloem. Make sure you know the difference between the stem and the root in terms of the arrangement of the xylem and the phloem. You can see in the stem, the xylem is on the inside. Okay, but have a look here, the phloem is on the root on the outside here. Make sure you know the difference, and together it makes up the vascular bundle. So in the stem, the xylem and the phloem, they are arranged in bundles near to the edge. Okay, but in the root, they are, the xylem and the phloem is in the center so that it can withstand all that force, that, because remember, water is coming in via osmosis. Okay, good. Now, we've spoken about those tiny holes, which is the stomata, stoma for singular, plural rather, stomata singular. So this allows for gaseous exchange. Okay, so you would have your oxygen going out, your carbon dioxide going in. Okay, good. So we've spoken about the fact that carbon dioxide needs to diffuse into the leaf, all right? And all of this is maintained by a nice concentration gradient. And then you'd have oxygen and water, which is going out, which is diffusing out, all right? However, the plant does not want to lose too much water, okay? The plants need to maintain this, because remember, water is one of the key reactant which is needed for photosynthesis. So the plant does not want to lose too much water. Okay, now it maintains this by through the opening and closing of the stomata. Okay, now what happens is the water concentration in the leaf decreases, and when that happens, water moves out through, or well, out of the guard cells by osmosis. Okay, Good. So we're going through all the steps here. So the water concentration in the leaf, it decreases. All right. Because water is moving, and that then triggers water to move out of the guard cell by osmosis. Okay. When that happens, the guard cell become flaccid and less curved. Okay. So you think about it, it's osmosis. You've lost water, you now become flaccid. Notice what happens to the size of the stomata here. The stomata then closes, okay? And when that stomata then closes, there's no exchange of gases, and therefore water loss decreases, which means that water, remember that water is being pulled up. So eventually, the water is going to start increasing in concentration inside the leaf, okay? So the water concentration inside the leaf increases, and when that increases, water then moves into the guard cell by osmosis. Okay, so the guard cells now are now going to become turgid. They're going to become bigger. And when they become turgid and more curved, it opens up. Okay, so you can see the opening here. And then guess what? The stomata opens. And then when it's open, gas exchange takes place. And when that happens, okay, when that happens, water level is going to decrease because water is going to be moving out, and the whole process is going to continue again. Okay, so remember, the key point that you need to note is that the stomata needs to open to allow carbon dioxide to go in. Okay, but when carbon dioxide is going in, oxygen moves out and water moves out. The plant needs to minimize that movement of water, okay? And to minimize that movement of water, it is done through the guard cells, okay? Through osmosis, all right? So when when water is lost, the guard cells become flaccid, less curved, stomata closes, water builds up, then they become turgid and more curved, then it opens up and the whole process continues, okay? Good. Now, there are factors which can affect evaporation. Now, one such factor which affects evaporation is temperature. And if it affects evaporation, in essence, will affect transpiration. Okay? So the higher the temperature, the more the particles are moving faster, and therefore, the quicker that they turn into a gas, and therefore it's easier for water to be lost via transpiration. Good. Also, humidity. So if the humidity is low, there's not much water vapor there, and therefore it means there's a bigger concentration gradient and water is going to be moving out of the plant. Okay. And if it's windy, it means therefore that the water vapor around the leaves are going to be blown away. Okay. I have closed here, but this should be leaves. It's going to be blown away, all right, and therefore means that the humidity is going to be low, increasing the concentration gradient, which therefore means that evaporation is going to be quicker, all right. And if any of these factors which affects evaporation, in essence, is going to affect transpiration. Now, how do we measure the rate of transpiration? This is measured using an instrument called a potometer, okay. So what happens here is that as the water evaporates from the stomata in a process called transpiration, what's going to happen? Remember, we've spoken about transpiration pull. It's going to pull the water up the stem, and the more water that moves up is pulled through the potometer, and then this bubble here is going to move. Okay, so if you note the distance that it was before and the distance after, you can then measure the rate of transpiration. Okay, and that summarizes everything that you need to know in terms of revision for chapter 4. All the best in your GCSEs. I am out.